Hello students, welcome to our first lecture on module 3 on precipitation. In this module, we will understand the key drivers of precipitation, what are the various forms of precipitation, and how we can measure precipitation once it has fallen on the ground. Also, we will look into some numerical examples where we will resolve the transportation of moisture in convective cells and try to estimate how much energy would be released and how much water would precipitate. Also, we will measure the average of precipitation that has fallen over given area. Then, as civil engineers, we have to also deal with the precipitation gauges. And when we have some measurements, there would be uncertainties and inconsistencies. So we'll learn some of the mathematical approaches that how to check for those inconsistencies. Then we will look into the hydrograph and mass curves. And finally, we will look into some of the statistics associated with precipitation and try to develop an intuition that how values of precipitation are translated to design standards that we deal as civil engineers. Now, in last lecture, we discussed about the amount of precipitation that is withheld in a vertical column of air, and we realized that it is just 77 mm of moisture that a 10-kilometer high saturated air column will hold, which is good enough to produce the minor storm. But the question arises, then how do we get the major storms? What are the key drivers for those major storms? And we will try to look into those aspects that how these major storms are produced. To understand that, we need to look into something called as the circulations. So when we talk about most of the moisture transportation that is taking place on the earth, that is the result of evaporation from oceans, and that moisture that evaporates that results in formation of clouds, and these clouds or air parcels, they are transported over large distances by air currents, and these air currents go to somewhere else, descend down in form of again as air parcels, and this cycle that setups all the way from evaporation to getting down of that air parcel or moisture is termed as the circulation. Since these circulation happens at much larger scales, and most of these circulations happen at global scale, we call the circulation setup in such a way as the global circulation. And the complete cycle all the way from evaporation to coming back, we would call these transport of air parcels as the cells that would set up on our earth system. So let us start looking into it from the global perspective. Now, as we know that our earth is spherical, and because of its peculiar shape and the tilt that we have around our vertical axis, which is of around 23.5 degrees, our areas surrounding equator, they receive direct more sunlight or more solar insolation from the sun. On the other hand, our poles on both sides, they receive relatively lesser insolation as compared to the equator, resulting in a strong gradient that gets set up between the equator and poles. To put this into perspective, our equator receives around 270 watt per meter square insolation from sun, what you learned as RS, the short wave radiations that we receive from sun in our previous unit. That's exactly what we are talking about here. On the other hand, our equators receive 90 watt per meter square. So there is a considerable difference when you look at 270 and 90 watt per meter square, as a result of which net energy transport takes place from the equator towards the pole, and the estimate of this net energy transport is in the order of 10 to the power 9 megawatts. So this much energy is transferred, and when this energy gets transferred, it happens in form of the air parcels getting transported, and that results in setting up of the cells that we will look into. Now, what happens at the equator? So at equator, we have more of this insolation or the solar radiations falling directly, as a result of which air gets warmer and rises up, creating a low pressure zone here. And at the equator, we get a low pressure zone because now hot air, which is lighter or less denser, rises up, goes upwards, and as it goes upwards, we learned that from the saturation pressure curve, that when air goes up, it will cool down, and if it has a moisture, it will reach its saturation, and once air is saturated, it is no longer able to hold the moisture, so either it gets um, precipitated or condensed if it finds the suitable conditions. Otherwise, air becomes super saturated, and as soon as we have ideal conditions for precipitation to happen, and we will talk about what those regional conditions are. But let us right now assume that when air gets saturated, we are going to get a downpour in form of precipitation. So as air rises, cloud formation happens, and when it reaches certain height, the temperature decreases, because as we are going up, the temperature is decreasing at the rate of 6.5 degrees Celsius per kilometer. So by the height of 8 to 10 kilometers, we are going to lose temperature significantly good enough to produce this condensation. And now this air starts moving towards the tropics, what we call as Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn, and it keeps on moving in north hemisphere as well as southern hemisphere, all the way till 30-degree north and 30-degree south latitudinal belt. Now, as it moves there, it starts descending, but now it doesn't have any moisture. So as it starts descending down, no moisture is present, and hence it would not cause any precipitation, or it would produce little or very scanty amount of precipitation. And now that once it descends here, we already have a low pressure here, and this is a convergence zone that is getting set up. And this, from this subtropical convergence zone, it will start moving towards the equator, as we have high pressure here and low pressure towards the equator, and this cycle gets set up continuously. And the cycle that set up between the equator and 30-degree north and 30-degree south of latitudes is known as the Hadley cell. This is called as a cell or circulation, and hence the named after the scientist who contributed towards its discovery, and hence names Hadley cell. Now, if you look at map of the world, it also explains that why most of the deserts, they fall around our 30-degree north belt. And the reason, of course, is because we just learned that air that rose from equator, it will give away all the moisture there itself, and hence by the time it reaches our 30 degrees north or 30 degrees south belts, it doesn't have any moisture left, as a result of which we get a big belt of deserts developing in that area. Now, when it starts moving back towards the equator, what it encounters? It encounters large oceans, because now it is moving along the surface. And as the air moves along the surface, it will pick up the properties of the surfaces along which it is gliding. And when it moves from this area, it encounters lot of moisture in form of lakes or in form of oceans, and pick up the moisture. And again, when it reaches here, these they become warm as well as moist, and this cycle continues. Now, if Earth would not have been rotating, we would get these lines in form of a straight line. That means in upper atmosphere, this air parcel will move in a straight line, and it will also come back in a straight line. However, it does not happen, because Earth is not only revolving around the sun, but it is also rotating. So what happens is that we are essentially dealing with a non-inertial frame. And beauty of this non-inertial frame is that we are also standing on this non-inertial frame. Now imagine that you are taking a merry-go-round and you are throwing a ball at one of your friends. If both of you are sitting on that particular swing, you would feel that that ball has taken the curvature. It is not going in the straight line. But somebody who is watching that ball from the ground, which happens to be an inertial frame in a reference to the merry-go-round, he would say that, yeah, this is not exactly curvilinear, but it is gone into a straight line. But this curvature happens because of the non-inertial frame, or the perspective from which you are seeing the motion. Now, when we consider that our friends are, all of us are sitting on this earth, and we are watching this experiment from the earth, and we would see that the air does not take a straight path just because of this pseudo force acting because of the non-inertial frame that earth happens to be because of its rotational aspects. And we call the diversion of the in the direction of air as it moves from equators to to other tropical belts or even towards pole as the Coriolis effect, which gives the typical trajectory or a curvature to the winds flowing. So now what happens is that in upper atmosphere, the direction of this force, the direction of this wind moment or the curvature would be from the west towards east. And when air returns back, because of this Coriolis effect, air will take the direction from east towards west as it moves towards the equator. And the reasoning for it can be found in an argument, because if you look at the equator and the tangential velocities at equator versus tangential velocities at 30° north, you can imagine that since equator has also to cover the same amount of radiance in a same amount of time as this 30° north has to cover, the component of tangential velocity at the equator, let us say v1, has to be much greater than v2 in proportion to the diameter of Earth. As a result of which, if a ball is thrown from here to here, it is going to have a higher tangential velocity at that point, and when it goes here, it would shift from the left direction towards right direction, and because of the action of Coriolis force, it appears to also take the curvilinear or curvature path. We will not go into details of the mathematics, but that should explain to you that why some of the patterns that we see on our Earth's surface, including cyclones or the directions of monsoons, they are not traveling in a straight line, but they always travel into the curved path, which can be attributed to rotation as well as the conservation of momentum that happens when fluid moves from the equators to higher altitude. Now, to illustrate this point further, here is an example that I was mentioning to. So there is a guy who is sitting at the periphery of this merry-go-round, and this is going anti-clockwise or west to east. That is same direction our Earth rotates, and this guy throws the ball from this position to the orange position. So it would be very hard for the guy who is sitting at the periphery to land this ball exactly into the hand of this orange guy, because their relative tangential velocities are different. So if he throw the ball, he or she throws the ball in same line, it is not going to end up here, but it will end up somewhere in the green position that I just circled because of the higher tangential velocity from where it originated. And to the guy who is sitting somewhere at the center, it would look like that the ball has diverged towards a direction, or sorry, in fact the guy who is sitting on the periphery will observe that ball has taken this curvilinear or non-linear trajectory as it moves from origin towards the source. Now when we extend the same example to the earth, imagine this guy, red guy, now is sitting on the equator and this orange guy is sitting on the pole. We see the similar trajectory that gets developed wherever air moves in the upper atmosphere as well as comes back towards the equator through the ground surfaces. So here I have shown some directions here. This is the map source from internet, where you see that these returning winds along the surface of the ground, they take the trajectory from starting from the right side towards the left, and similarly all the winds that are originating in the southern hemisphere, they follow the exactly opposite pattern, and these are the surface winds. So we call the winds coming from 30 degrees north towards the equator as the trade winds, and winds coming from 30 degrees south towards the equator as southeasterly trade. So how we name them? Originating from the south and eastern direction, going towards the west. So from where they originate is more southeast towards, as compared to the source, as compared to the destination where they're going to get terminated, and hence the name. Now the convergence area where these winds coming from tropics towards the equator along the surface meets, that region is called as ITCZ. This is an important terminology that we need to remember, which stands for Intertropical Convergence Zone. And what this means is that wherever convergence is happening from both the tropic air that is coming in from tropic, wherever that meets, that becomes an ITCZ. And this ITCZ is a very important phenomena when it comes to explaining the origin of monsoons. Now, when you look at this map of India, what happens during summer? During summer, land gets heated comparatively more in as oceans, as a result of which this ITCZ, where that convergence of winds happen, it shifts over the Indian landmass, resulting in development of a low pressure belt here. And now the winds that are coming from the south, from south, and since they have already crossed the equator, because we are way above the equator, around 8 degrees above the equator, that wind would diverge from left to right, and on the way they will pick up the moisture from Indian Ocean. As they pick up the moisture from Indian Ocean, they will come here and try to converge, and this is the area where entire convergence is happening. So from the equator, now our belt has shifted more towards the landmass, and here we have a barrier of Himalayas that result in stopping the winds that are bringing moisture from Indian Ocean to cross this ITCZ, resulting in the heavy downpour during month of summers and resulting in the origin of monsoons that benefit Indian subcontinent a lot. And sometimes when the strength of this low pressure ITCZ is stronger in comparison to the temperature of oceans, resulting in much stronger currents here, what that would result in, that would result in much stronger monsoon. Sometimes this low pressure may not be strong enough to attract the winds as strongly as it would if this would have been a real low pressure area. That would mean that we are going to have a weaker monsoon. Again, this is a general explanation that what shapes our phenomena, and much more complexities are involved. But primarily it's the formation of ITCZ that guides the strength of monsoons and how monsoons will form. And now what happens in winters? In winters, as the temperature of land starts decreasing because of change in the position of Earth relative to Sun, this ITCZ again shifts back towards the equator. And this is the area where winds from 30 degrees north will come towards this ITCZ. And now, since it has shifted below, we would not get fair share of monsoons. The only precipitation that we are going to get is when the winds cross Bay of Bengal and cuts the parts or the southern parts of our states, resulting in the northeast monsoons. So most of the Indian landmass receives the rainfall from the southwest monsoons, as the winds originate from south and west and goes towards the eastern direction, whereas when monsoons recede or retreat, winds originate from northeast and crosses the southern states of India, resulting in precipitation. And this typical trajectory that these receding and incoming winds take is again because of Coriolis effect. So one thing is for sure, that is to understand precipitation holistically, these large scale movements cannot be ignored, and that was the reason we touched upon certain aspects that you might have learned in your geography classes in high school, but giving it more of a technical form. Now, these are the large scale circulation. These are going to happen even when uh, uh, every year. Then there are certain factors that also influence that how much precipitation your area is going to receive versus area B is going to receive, and not the saturation would be enough for resultant of precipitation.